2 now of the working on the Chevy 2-stroke here. So here's what I did with this block. Drilled another hole here so that I could put this, you can see I got a socket in here, so this way the motor won't turn over whenever I'm knocking this balancer bolt off. Now these bolts are so long, I had to put these sockets in here as a spacer, so you'll need something like that. So that's it for that. And then this bar up here, I've got 2 bolts in here at the end with the chain running across them. And then I'm running this ratchet strap down and then through the center link there of that chain. This way I can adjust the height. I can move the engine up and down if I need to get to a bolt that's blocked by the frame rail here. And then I ran the chain up and around just as a precaution in case that, you know, this thing snaps. God knows how old this thing is. It could be all dry rotted for all I know. So that's pretty much it for that little setup. It's got a good little bow going on, but I added a little extender pipe because this was right about here and it was pushing down on this fuse box pretty hard, but now it's kind of resting up on the fender here. So that's where we're at with that. And I got the wheel off here. So now I can get into that bolt. I can get that knocked loose. Now, a heads up, this is gonna be super, super tight. They're never easy to break loose. So I might even have to heat it up with a torch. Just a propane torch will work. Let it cool down and then try and break that thing loose. And if I can't do it with a breaker bar, then I'll have to break out the impact wrench, but we'll see what happens. Little help from the propane torch, and just heated up the end of the bolt here. It didn't take long, you know, a couple minutes on there, heated it up, and it broke right off. Just with just an extension, 21 millimeter on there, and I used big breaker bar like that. And then from there, I just used this pry bar and just kind of stuck it behind there, did the old wiggly woo. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on it because you certainly don't want to crack the aluminum timing chain cover. But just a little wiggle, and then you can kind of grab it and you can work it off with your hands. So that's where we're at with that now. And we can move on to, I don't know what yet. I got to get under there now and see what's what. I might have to probably got to take the starter out, and then AC. I might have to disconnect unbolt it and move it over to the side if it's in the way of the oil pan bolts. But I don't know yet, so we'll get underneath there and see what's going on with that. And certainly not going to disconnect that. Don't do that. That would be bad. But these bolts here hold the pump on there. Probably going to have to move that. And I don't know. We'll see what's next after that. Okay. Let's go under here and take a look. So, looks like just that lower bolt on the AC pump, that'll definitely have to come off there because it goes right into the oil pan there. And then we'll pull the dipstick tube out, maybe. Take the starter out, but then it doesn't look like there's really much of anything else kind of in the way. So we got those bolts there, a couple over along this side, and then there's one there. It's kind of frame rails in a way, but we can get to it from the side. And that's pretty much it all the way around. So I think this should be fairly simple, but I've been wrong once or twice before in my life. I'm going to take that lower bolt out, pull the dipstick, pull the starter. I'm not sure what's holding the starter in. I know it's not that big bolt there, or either of those. It must be that one, maybe one up above somewhere. So we'll do that. We'll get those 3 things out of the way, and we'll see if we can knock this oil pan off of here. Sure is coming along now. I just got this side cover taken off, and that's not too bad. It's pretty easy to get to. There's really nothing too complicated about that. I got the bolt taken out of the AC pump, got the dipstick tube out. It just wiggles out, so just grab it and wiggle on it a little bit. And the starter came right out. There's 2 bolts, so there was the one on the bottom and there's one above. So just those 2 bolts, that comes out. Just careful you don't drop it on your face. I almost did that. And on this side cover here, there's 1 bolt up kind of high up in this area, and it's 1 real long bolt. So it's this one here. The rest of them are just small little 10 millimeter. But this one, I actually had to drop the engine down a little bit to get it to come out and clear the frame underneath it here. But aside from this one, the rest of them are pretty easy to get out. And I'll show you the cover here. So that's the cover. And when you're looking at it from the bottom, so here it is. If you're underneath the car, there's this little tab right here that's kind of cast into this cover, and that's a good spot there to use your little pry bar to pry this, you know, away to pull it off. I wouldn't, maybe one there. I really wouldn't pry anywhere else on it. You know, you want to, if you break it, well, then you're looking at getting another one. So that was like the heaviest spot for a pry bar there. So just a heads up on that. I took that bolt out, but I realized it was really short, so it just holds this cover on. So that doesn't need to come off. That's where that real long bolt went, right there through that center. Okay, so now I think the oil pan is ready to come off, or at least I hope so. We've reached a big milestone here. Oil pan is out, and not too difficult to get off of there. It is glued on, there's no gasket. What you need to know about the oil pan, there's these 4 large bolts that are in the back side here on the transmission side. So there's 4 of those. There's this 1 long one here in the center. And then there's 14 other little ones. So once you get those off, there's nothing else holding it on. It's just kind of free to come off, but you got to pry it off. And so what I found was let's see if I can get you in here. So the oil pan, right about here on this corner, there was a spot with a little tab where you can put your pry bar in there, work it down, and then I stuck a screwdriver in over here when I got a gap. I just kind of wiggled it, and then it dropped right off. Whenever I get the motivation, crawl back under there and pull these pistons out. I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, so we're ready to disconnect our rod bolts so we can pull our pistons out, and they'll go out through the top, obviously. But what I've done here is I just stuck the balancer on here so that I can grab the crankshaft and I can just see how I can turn it. And it's easy enough to turn by hand. And that way I can get the bolts off of the cap here, pull the cap off, and we'll be able to drive the piston up. So we can get that one and that one. But what we want to do is just one at a time. So you don't want to take these 2 caps off at the same time. We just want to do one at a time and then get that. Because what we're going to need to do is rotate the crankshaft a little bit so we can get like a wooden dowel rod or something up in there to push that connecting rod up and push the piston out of the hole. So I'm going to go ahead and break. I'll just start with this one. I'll break this one loose and we'll just see how that goes. And not as dirty down here as I thought. Well, maybe not. Yeah, that's pretty gross. That's pretty disgusting. See, that looks clean, you know, but the rest of this, look at, I could just scrape that gunk off there with my finger. Look at that. I could carve my name in here. Maybe I should do that, actually. Not like anybody will ever see it. this engine ever dies again, it'll end up just getting crushed at the metal recycler. Nobody's ever gonna build this one again, unless it's me. Okay, enough chit-chatting. I'll get back to work here. First piston is out, and at first glance, everything looks pretty good. Surprising. The bearings look really nice. For 160,000 miles, and I don't maintain this thing at all, I figured these bearings were going to look just absolutely trashed. But they look really good. That is really surprising. And they are a full floating piston, so that's interesting. They have a coated skirt. And neither of the rings are broken. This is cylinder number 4, which had good compression, so I'm not surprised that the compression rings look really good, which are the top two here. And then our oil ring really isn't as gummed up as I thought it would be. But these oil rings are apparently the main problem with these engines. They're a low tension ring, and apparently they just don't have enough tension in there. So I'll show you on the next one when I pull it out. These rings, they sit almost flush all the way around with the edge of the piston. They don't kind of stick out a little bit like a typical ring would. See, your compression rings really pop out. You can see how much space there is, with them. Oil rings don't do that quite like a compression ring, but usually they stick out a little bit. This did not stick out at all. This was totally flush all around, and I suspect that's and the the low tension issue, or the fact that they are low tension rings. That's the problem. That's why they burn so much oil. The oil just gets right past them. So I'll show you on the next one that I pull out. And while you're doing this, when you take this cap off, just be very careful, when you push the piston up in there. All I used was just this metal solid rod. And when the cap was off, I just put the rod up against where the hole is, and just lightly with my hand, just kind of push the piston and the rod all the way up. And you just got to be careful, keep it centered. You got to move the crank journal, just grab the balancer, turn it so the crank journal kind of is out of center. So that way you can get this in there and you can drive it up. But if it gets stuck, don't be beating on it, because this part of the rod here can get caught on the edge of the cylinder as it's going up. So make sure that this is centered in the bore, and then work it up nice and easy. Anyway, I'll get the next one out, and I'll show you how that oil ring looks. So right now I'm working on the cylinder head. So I'm going to show you the pistons real quick so you can see what these rings look like coming out of here. So let's take a look at those real quick. Okay, let's take a look at these rings. So the top two rings, these are our compression rings. And you can see they've got, they are a little slippery. They've got a fair amount of tension to them. They're not broken or collapsed in any way. And that's why this engine did have good compression, minus the hole that we blew in our exhaust valve. But the oil ring, as you can see here, let me try and even push it out a little bit. There's virtually no tension on it. It's just completely, may as well be non-existent. It's really hard to see here in the camera, but it's just, it's really small ring. Now, oil rings are generally a lot smaller, and they don't have the tension that the compression rings have for obvious reasons. But these are just particularly bad. And if you haven't seen really any pistons in real life before, you don't have much to compare it against, but I've seen a fair share of them, and these are certainly not ideal. So hopefully the new rings, I'll compare the old rings to the new rings once I get to at least you know, one set of new rings on and we can take a look at the difference. And so another thing that's kind of hard to see in the camera here, but the skirting here, there's actually a lip right here at the edge. And it's kind of hard to tell, especially with my glove on here. I can't really use my fingernail, but right at the edge of the skirt here, it kind of goes in. There's like a little indent. And so even the ring, when it's, you know, kind of in its fully expanded position, you know, I still don't think it's as wide as the skirt is. So it kind of serves no purpose. I could even put I could put a set of calipers on here and measure that. But yeah, it almost feels as though the skirt's wider than the ring. So pretty obvious why these just don't work. And this engine was burning a quart of oil every 200 miles. So yeah, it's a shame the entire engine had to come apart for that. Everything else is good. Pistons look great. You know, there's not really a lot of carbon buildup. I didn't scrape it off. That's just how it looked. So it's fairly clean. That's 160,000 miles. Not too bad otherwise. And these two compression rings probably would have lasted a long time. Oh well. But that's what you get with, you know, the emissions engines. You know, the low tension, low drag piston rings. Oh well. So, cylinder head, I'm getting ready to tear this all apart now. I'm gonna clean all this up. So I've gone ahead and I've marked each of these caps. So I punched an E on there for exhaust, and then I got them numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I can pull these off, pull the cams out and the springs and all that stuff, send the head off to the machine shop, get it resurfaced, and they'll jet wash all the garbage off of it. That thing was quite difficult to get out of there, actually. So if you're gonna do that, this is an 1.25 inch socket, or whatever the metric equivalency is. And yeah, that's the tensioner there. So that was there's a good bit of pressure to get that off. And then these plugs here on the back side, took those out. That's a 6mm Allen wrench. Aside from that, pretty much pull the cams and stuff out of there, and then that'll be ready to get cleaned up.